Alrighty guys, welcome back to another episode of Officer Ben Responds to the Comments. I've decided that I like making this kind of video because one of the things I like to do with this channel, by telling you the thoughts of a patrol officer, is I like to show people and demonstrate to them like common law enforcement things. I don't know if it's terms or procedures or whatever you want to call it, but that's what we're going to do today. And the concept that I want to kind of go over and educate everybody about today is going to be the concept of reasonable suspicion. The video that we're going to use to demonstrate reasonable suspicion is going to be this one from my body camera channel the other day, where an officer was dispatched on a call about people who had taken over a vacant garage, and the caller was complaining that they were taking it over for narcotics activity. I'm going to show a little clip from the video here in just a moment, just to set the scene so everybody knows exactly where we're coming from when we get into that. But I wanted to also kind of set the scene so you have something to think about while you're watching the video. And that concept is going to be reasonable suspicion. The reason I chose reasonable suspicion is because I saw it in the comments of that particular video. We have this guy, Devin Schwartz. He likes to comment on the videos a lot, and he generally doesn't have positive things to say. He thinks that he knows more than me, and he thinks that he knows more than all the other police officers out there. So his comment is, what crime was she suspected of having committed? The caller, clearly a third party. She said she had permission to be there. She's not under obligation to answer questions. At that point, the officer had no reasonable, articulable suspicion there was any crime happening, and she should have been free to leave. So that is his comment. That's what I'm going to be responding to and talking to you about today. And I don't know. Let's watch a short clip from the video to set the scene, and then when I come back, let's talk about some legal principles.
Yes, I was wanting to see if I can report the people moved out of this house at 406 South Harris Avenue, and in the back of it, I think they took over as a drug house. There's been so many people going in and out there.
Okay. And what is your name?
Holly.
Holly, what's your phone number?
614.
And
Columbus Police. Sound off your end and let me see your hands.
150, would you mind backing up 104 on this?
What are you doing? Both your hands.
She's just calling saying she's
two. How many more?
She's mad because we're not there. She's cussing everybody out.
Can I grab my shoes?
No. Come out here for now.
104 from Clemens.
Thank you.
193. Can you send me your other cruiser? There's like 5 or 6 people in this garage.
All right, so the other car can start that way. 406 South Harris.
Hands out of your pockets.
Nothing in my pocket.
No, I said keep your hands out of your pockets.
All right, 8183, can you head that way?
Yeah, this is not your house.
We have permission to be here.
Who?
Miss Wanda gave us permission.
What are you doing in here?
Go look.
I'm gonna in a minute.
Okay, go look.
Stop being smart. Shut up.
You can't even mess with us right now.
Shut up.
You have no right.
Shut your mouth.
You have no right, bro.
You better get back over here right now.
Alrighty, so there you have it. We have a person who called 911 and said the house next to me is vacant and it's been taken over by vagrants using narcotics. And I would like an officer to show up and investigate. An officer shows up to investigate, and he sees this group of rabble-rousers standing outside the garage. He tries to investigate. This female takes off running. At that point in time, he was distracted from his duties of investigating this crime, had to go chase after her and tackle her. There was some misunderstanding about whether or not he had the authority to do that because, like Devin said, he had no reasonable articulable suspicion that a crime had occurred. Well, let's talk about what reasonable suspicion means. I went ahead and brought it up for you here, and then we're going to go through this and his other comments. So this says, and this is from searchandseizure.org. I found a lot of versions that have almost the exact same wording. I just like this because it's on a white background. I'm hoping that you guys will be able to read along with the video if you so choose. So it says reasonable suspicion is a term used to describe if a person has been or will be involved in a crime based on specific facts and circumstances. It may use to justify an investigatory stop. Reasonable suspicion is more than a hunch that a crime has been committed, but does not require as much evidence as probable cause, which is needed to obtain a search warrant or search and arrest warrants. To evaluate reasonable suspicion, the court must decide if a reasonable person or reasonable officer would infer that the person is involved in a crime where the circumstance is the same. And then it goes on down here, when an investigatory stop for reasonable suspicion, or when would this be appropriate? And they give an example. If a person was carrying items that would be useful for committing a crime, an officer has reasonable suspicion to stop him or her. An example would be carrying a wire hanger, looking into parked vehicles late at night. The officer might believe that person is out committing crime. They might detain that person to investigate whether or not a crime has occurred. So let's go back to this situation here. The officers were responding to a 911 call with a known caller. The person called in, gave their name, gave their phone number, and said, hey, listen, the house next door to me is being broken into. These people are using it for a narcotics activity. Can you send an officer out? An officer arrives on scene. He sees this group of people here in the back of a vacant house. So between the caller and what the officer finds when he arrives on scene, that's definitely enough reasonable suspicion to detain these people. The reason he's detaining them is that he can conduct his investigation. So let's go back to Devin's comment here. What crime are they suspected of having committed to be detained? Well, the crime that they are suspected of having committed in order to be detained is trespassing, possibly breaking and entering, because a garage is not an occupied structure. You burglarize a home, you break and enter into a vacant structure. And then also some different narcotics activity. She said she had permission to be there. I tell you what, I've been a police officer for 11 and a half years now or so. I've been in this situation a lot of times. Guess what? People generally say that they have permission to be places that they actually don't have permission to be. This might come as a surprise to people, but often people that are committing crimes lie to the police. I know that's going to come as a shock to a great many of you. And one good example of that was an incident where I was actually coming home from work one morning. And I've told the story on the channel before, so I won't go into great detail now. But I had a little bit of overtime. I was running late. I remember it was a football Saturday in Columbus, Ohio, which football Saturdays, you remember those days. Ohio State football is a big deal here. So I was walking, and I remember I was upset that I was running late and I was going to get to bed late and I wasn't going to get up in time for the game. And that frustrated me. And as I pulled up to my house, there was also a van parked in the street where I normally parked my car. So I had to park further away from the house. As I'm walking through my neighborhood, in between my neighbor's garage and my garage, there's this big black guy standing there. And there aren't any big black guys that live within 6 or 7 houses of me. So little backstory, my neighbor's kid had been arrested for dealing narcotics. It was actually an F1 drug trafficking warrant had been served on him 2 months prior to this interaction. I was not afraid to let his friends know that I was a police officer. I often would communicate with them when they were congregating around in front of his house, and I made sure that they understood that I did not appreciate them congregating in my neighborhood, if you know what I'm saying. So as this guy's walking out between the houses, I confronted him. I said, hey, what are you doing? This guy's carrying a laptop computer, had a cell phone charger hanging out of his pocket, and I don't remember much else. But he froze. And this was a black guy who was like 6'2", 6'3", probably 250 plus pounds, had a giant head on him, like a Samoan guy or something like that. And I looked at him and I said, hey, what are you doing? He froze and he turned white as a ghost. He says, nothing, man. I'm not doing anything. Now, mind you, I'm in full uniform. He didn't know that I lived here. He just thought that I was a police officer that was responding to a call about him. He had good reason to believe a police officer was responding to a call about him because he had been out burglarizing houses all night long. So when I said, what are you doing, man? He said, nothing. I'm not doing nothing, man. That raised alarm bells in my head because that's not a normal response. Normal response would be like, oh, hey, man, I'm just leaving my buddy's house. He didn't say that. So I said, I put my stuff down. I said, no, what the hell are you doing? That's when he said, I'm coming from my cousin's house. Really? Coming from your cousin's house, huh? And so then I took a step forward towards him. We asked some questions about where his cousin lived. And finally I said, what house does your cousin live? He pointed at my house. At that point in time, I was going to be detaining him. He decided to run, chased after him, yada, yada, yada. But this all started with me just confronting him about where he was supposed to be. And he told me that he was coming from a family member's house, that I had no reason to detain him. He was lying. That's what criminals do. So the next point, because that was a long way of explaining how she said she had permission to be there. The next part is she's under no obligation to answer questions. This is correct. You can be detained under reasonable suspicion, and you're not required to give your name and ID or speak to officers. Officers can just say, hey, listen, I believe that there's a crime happening here. I'm going to detain you while I investigate this crime. So he said at that point, the officers had no reasonable articulable suspicion to believe that a crime was happening. They should have been free to go. That is not true. The thing that Devin and his little brain can't quite understand is that reasonable suspicion and probable cause are two very different things. So when I replied to him about the trespassing, whatever, and he said, no, they have permission to be there, I responded that saying you have permission to be there doesn't mean you actually have permission to be there. He said, well, I'm well aware of that, but look what the officer knows. Someone who is clearly not the property owner called. The person on the property said they have permission to be there. Let's wrap our head around that for a moment, because what he's saying is the person who owned the vacant house didn't call the police. So the officers should not have been able to detain these people, that they did not have reasonable suspicion that a crime had occurred. Let's imagine Devin for a moment. I'm going to use you as an example because it's easy. Let's imagine that you are not home. I don't know if you work, but let's pretend for a second that you do work. You're at work and your neighbor calls 911 and says, hey, my neighbor Devin, he's not home. There's some people coming and going from his house that I've never seen before. They're loading TVs. I don't think that they should be doing that. Can you send an officer out to investigate this? An officer will respond on scene, see somebody walking in and out of Devin's house, not even carrying anything, just walking in and out of the house, and says, hey, can you hang on for a second? I need to talk to you. We got a call that you're breaking in. The person says, no, I know the property owner. I am not breaking in. I have permission to be here. Should the officer go ahead and detain that person, or should they say, I'm sorry, sir, you are free to go? Let me know, Devin, how would you feel if the police showed up, found someone burglarizing your house, but the person that was doing the burglarizing just said, no, I have permission to be here. I know the property owner. And then, or they even throw out a random name. They're like, I know John. John is the one that lives here. And then the officers just let them go. Let's say the officers don't detain them. They don't say, and like the person doesn't say, hey, can I leave? The officers just let the person walk back into the house. The officers go talk to the neighbor. They get on the computer. They do an address search and they find there's no John that lives here. It's actually Devin Swartz that lives here. They go back and they try to detain that person, but he just went in the front door and out the back door. He's now gone, and a lot of your property is also gone with him. That's the reason that the officers can actually detain people based on a 911 call. The 911 call alone gives the officers reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred. Specifically, well, I'll even go so far as to say sometimes a 911 call can actually give them probable cause. That gets into a different kind of minutia, but we can talk about that another time. I don't want to bog down this conversation. So I mentioned before that there's another guy that shares a brain with him, and I want to address his comment real quickly because another reply that I made. So he had the same question, other than running, what crime did they committing? And by this time I was getting a little bit more warmed up in my comment replies. I said trespassing, breaking and entering, and obstructing official business. This is when Devin once again chimes in with his giant brain. And he said, no, to obstruct official business, the cop must have reasonable articulable suspicion that a crime was taking place or just took place or about to. He just had a random caller. Well, Devin, you are very wrong because there was a reasonable articulable suspicion. The reason reasonable suspicion was created when the neighbor called 911. It became even more articulable when the officer arrived on scene and people started streaming out of the garage. Let's go back to this scene here. If you're a police officer that works in this neighborhood and you roll up on this, you know the people. These people are very clearly drug users. He got a call about drug users taking over a vacant garage. He gets on scene or starts ordering people out, and a bunch of drug users start streaming out of the garage. This is something that a good officer who works in these neighborhoods can testify to based on his experience. So now not only does he have reasonable suspicion, but he has a reasonable articulable suspicion to believe that a crime has occurred, and he can now investigate this crime. To investigate that crime, he has to detain these people. If one of them takes off running, what he was doing while detaining those people was his official business. His official business is to detain these people and conduct an investigation. When one of them runs, they are hindering his ability to do his official business, also known as obstructing official business. And that's what happened when they ran. Let's go down to this one here. Is interesting because it just further highlights the fact that people don't know what it is they're talking about. So this is when I address the people saying that they have permission to be there. And I told him to go back to clown school. And he said, that's not what I said. I said, according to what we saw in the video, they have permission to be there, which we already know is not true. And he says, which may or may not be true. The homeowner or the person who called 911 is not the homeowner. So they could have legitimate permission. That's true. They could have legitimate permission, but the officers also have the right and the authority to detain them to determine whether or not they had legitimate permission to be there. He said, I did not say at any point that they should not investigate, but until they do that, only if they discover illegal activity, there is no crime. Have you ever heard of innocent until proven guilty? So here he goes from conflating reasonable suspicion, probable cause, and guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and which is something that happens in court. You can be charged with a crime without proof that you did it. Probable cause is 51%. So have you ever heard of innocent until proven guilty? Yes, but you still have to detain these people to conduct your investigation. Because if you don't detain these people and they just leave, and then you find evidence that a crime had occurred, you're like, well, there was definitely a crime that occurred, and the people that committed this crime, they all just left, and I just let them leave. And then he further goes on to, what did he say? I said, except for the running, the video shows no crime taking place. We certainly didn't see any breaking and entering. Just to assume that those people were criminals is what most cops do. And that's why most cops fucking suck and why people hate them. No, it's just not true. When somebody calls 911 to report a crime, the officers have to respond and investigate that crime. if there's a bunch of people that look like they're the suspects that the 911 caller identified, then the officers have to detain those people and conduct an investigation. If they don't find any evidence and they don't develop probable cause, they release those people. If they do find evidence and they do develop probable cause, they might go ahead and charge those people. In this particular instance, which is something that Devin took issue with, was that she wasn't charged with obstructing official business at the end of the day. That doesn't mean that she's innocent of obstructing official business. It just means that the officers chose not to charge her in this case. So, getting back to the beginning, what is reasonable suspicion? Reasonable suspicion is a term used to describe whether a person has been or will be involved in a crime under specific facts. It may be used to justify an investigatory stop. So if an officer suspects that you are out committing crime, he can actually detain you for a short period of time in order to conduct that investigation. That's actually where Terry stops come from, which I'm not going to get all the way into Terry stops, but that's where all this stuff comes from. It doesn't come from probable cause. It comes from reasonable suspicion. So I think I've rambled on for a little bit, probably too long, but I wanted to make sure that I addressed those points. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something. I don't know. I'm out of here. I'll talk to you guys later.